Today is the day. You guys have been leading up to this episode for quite a while now, for a couple of weeks. I had done an interview with a white Afrikaner from South Africa, had that conversation. It is something that needed to be discussed. I had done an episode a couple of weeks ago talking about the meeting that took place between the president of South Africa, President Ramaphosa, and President Donald J. Trump, where Trump had made the accusation that there is, in fact, a genocide going on in South Africa. I did this video and there was a lot of reaction, a lot of reaction. People were accusing me of just saying things, repeating things, not knowing the truth about what's actually going on, that this is not the case, that it's not a genocide, and that they were accusing me of not doing the research, not doing the deep dive, not having spoken to anybody from South Africa. And based off of that video and the reaction that came from that, a South African had reached out to me and said they would love to have a conversation with me about what's truly going on in South Africa. And that's what I intend to bring to you guys today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's start with this deep dive into what's truly going on in South Africa, shall we?
There is something that has been on my heart that I did want to discuss. Discipline is a huge part of being productive, being lucrative. I am not for anything that goes against true productivity, true sovereignty of the individual. The choices that we make are what's going to be up for judgment.
All right, you guys. So as I said in the open, we are going to have a deep dive. Now, before I get into the interview with the gentleman that I spoke with from South Africa, I do want to show you guys a couple of clips just to confirm that what I think is going on here, that is this a genocide that's taking place against white Africans? Yeah, I'm convinced. The information, the research, that's what this looks like. From the conversation that I had with this gentleman, it starts off talking about the farm murders and all the violence that's taking place towards white Africans, and it gets into the motives of the government, to the history of South Africa as to why all these things might be taking place. I do not believe that we should open our borders to people who are victims all over the world. However, I do believe that it is important for U.S. citizens to be very much aware of how blessed we are to be American, that we don't have to live the way that these individuals are living in fear. It's remarkable how these individuals are able to survive the tragedies that they are dealing with. And so before I get into the interview, guys, I do want to show you guys a couple of clips. I'm going to show you some of the things that I saw. Some of them are graphic, some less graphic. I will stay within the policies of YouTube so that way it's not too graphic and too violent for you guys. But that way there is no doubt in your mind, the way there is no doubt in my mind, that there is violence taking place towards the white Afrikaner. So before I get into the interview, let's go ahead and let's start with these clips. The first one I'm going to show you is from one of the documentaries that I had watched, and I will get into all the details about the documentary, and I will be linking all of the documentaries that I had watched in the description box so that way you guys have access to the videos as well. I'm going to start off with the daughter of a victim who was gunned down, okay, by Black South Africans, a white Afrikaner who had been gunned down by Black Africans. And she goes in detail about what's going on or what happened to her father as to reasons why, how he suffered, all of it. Let's go ahead and let's start with that clip first, shall we? Okay, guys, so the name of this documentary is called Farmlands. It came out in 2018. So this should tell you that this is something that has been going on for quite a while, okay? And this was just one of the documentaries that I had watched. So let me go ahead and let's run it, shall we?
There was one shot that ricocheted against that wall. All the time, my dad's being shot. Back, arms, legs. And my dad slumped over this chair, slumped forward over this chair, and he was shot in the back of the head here. Just execution style in the back of the head. So it was 8. They found 8 cartridges, but 6, he was shot 6 times.
Who came and found him here?
My aunt and friends of theirs, and there were 4 farmers. One of the people that were here on the scene was studying to be a doctor. They tried CPR, but he was dead by the time they got here. He'd already succumbed to his injuries. Yeah, so this is where my dad died. He was killed. Okay. I know, for what, for what? He was a good man. He was an awesome man. And to shoot somebody 6 times, execution style. You think it gets easier, and it never does, unfortunately. My dad was, and you will back me up, and everybody will back me up. My dad was the most loving person. He cold-bloodedly just for, and so all that took about 20,000 Rand in the safe. They took that, helped themselves to food in the fridge, and then hit the road. And then bumped into, or saw all the farmers arriving and ran. And they spent the night, the two of them, at one of the farms and got back to Aberdeen. And by Saturday,
I'll leave it there, you guys. I'm going to link that documentary into the description box. Okay, so this is just one of many of the survivors of said victims that are in this documentary where they talk about the violence that took place. And it is because of the fact that they are white farmers. You watch that documentary and you find out that it is because they are white Afrikaners who own the land. It is just as simple as that. I will link that in the description box for you. The next clip I'm going to show you guys is going to get into some of the reasonings for why these things are happening. There's another documentary that I'm going to show you, just parts of it as well, just before we get into the interview, guys, where you see the underlining reasons for why this might be happening, which I was quite astounded by. My mind did not even go there when I first came across these stories, just even from the interview or the conversation that had taken place between President Trump and President Ramaphosa did not occur to me that what I found out from this documentary could have even been the case. It just didn't even go there. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to pull up the next thing for you guys because it gets into the underlining motives and reasonings as to why a government is allowing these things to happen. So let's go ahead and let's run the next clip for you guys, shall we? All right, guys. So this here is called Tainted Heroes. Okay, this is a pretty old documentary. A lot of funding went into this. You can tell that when you watch the entire thing. Now, I'm not going to go into full detail here or watch the whole thing here, obviously. But I'm going to show you parts of this documentary just so you have an understanding as to how this whole thing began and where I got surprised at. It was unbelievable. Let's go ahead and let's run it, shall we?
The apartheid system as applied by the Prime Minister Dr. Hendrik Verwoerd is essentially a system of separate development, according to which homelands are awarded to different cultural groups living within the territorial state of South Africa. The idea is to regard this territory as similar to Europe, and different peoples are therefore awarded distinct homelands, similar to the variety of states that exist in Europe. But grand apartheid, which focuses on homelands for different peoples, becomes a micromanaged small apartheid, which ultimately leads to a society that is completely divided along racial lines. The policy of separate development soon becomes discredited, and resistance to the South African government grows as race relations deteriorate.
Well, the ANC decided upon armed struggle after a long period of consideration because the ANC was essentially at the beginning a peaceful organization that it wanted to resolve the problems of South Africa through dialogue.
There were far more racist and repressive states than South Africa in the 1980s, but few of them had gone through the business or bother of codifying their system and creating state law as the apartheid government did. And therefore, it was not only a moral target, it was a relatively speaking easy target. And then, of course, there was the confluence of actors in the Cold War.
In 1960, the ANC is declared an illegal organization as a result of its involvement in illegal activities and its alliance with the South African Communist Party. Fixed on leading South Africa on the path towards a communist state, the SACP experiences difficulties in gathering support.
Okay. Now, I'm going to show you some of the things that happens to individuals who decide to stand up against the ANC. But that was one of the things that surprised me the most. When I started this journey, from that video that I had done, talking about the conversation between President Trump and President Ramaphosa, my mind, I knew that it was a communist policy. You just, we say these things. As conservatives, we see a policy that looks communist, like how I feel about the DEI, for example. It's a communist policy. We know this. But to have the idea that there is, in fact, a communist party, communist relationships within the country of South Africa, my mind did not go there when I started this whole deep dive. Okay, when I started this whole conversation, it did not occur to me that communism was a huge part of this. It was unbelievable to me. And it does give you some insight as to why these things are happening today. Now, you guys, I'm going to show you a part of this documentary that shows you what happens to the Black Africans who speak out against the ANC, which is a communist entity, in my opinion. That's just what this is. You watch this documentary and there's no way you don't come to that conclusion. Again, I will be putting all of the documentaries in the description box so you guys can go ahead and watch it yourself. And then tell me you don't come to the same conclusions that I do. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to fast forward a bit so that way you have a little bit more context as to what happens to Black Africans who speak out against the violence and who speak out against the ANC, a communist entity. Let's go ahead and let's do that, shall we? Okay, guys, so this, it's not so graphic, but it does give you an idea of what the violence looks like towards those who spoke out against the ANC back then. So let's go ahead and let's talk about that. Let's show that.
Prisoners in camps such as Quattro are subjected to extreme levels of torture. Although many prisoners die as a result of these actions, the exact number of casualties remains unknown. Some of the survivors go public about the atrocities that occur in these ANC camps. Yet little is known about the leaders behind these tortures. Later, the ANC will refuse to provide the names of the leaders who manage these camps. What is known, however, is that in 1991, ANC President Nelson Mandela orders a commission of inquiry into abuses within the ANC in exile. Mandela's proposal is met with fierce opposition from within the ANC's National Executive Committee. Mandela's instruction to investigate these atrocities is adamantly opposed by 3 ANC veterans in particular, namely Joe Nhlanhla, Chris Hani, and Jacob Zuma.
There were detentions in Angola. I have no knowledge of those detentions because most of the time I was deployed in the forward areas. I did not participate in some of those detentions, but people were necessarily detained because of their activities against our movement. There necessarily had to be action taken against them in the camps. That in any camp, generally, when people engage in misdemeanor, you detain them, not necessarily in a prison as such, but there are detention facilities.
I'm going to leave it there. I will say, I give credit to the documentary for speaking to people who were a part of the ANC. It's like, clearly you're not going to go into depth about what really happened here. If Nelson Mandela is saying that he wants an investigation into what's going on here and you refuse him, why are we supposed to believe that the violence isn't taking place? So you guys have an idea as to what the history is here, that there is communism that was associated with the ANC, that is associated with the violence. But as racial divisions grew, there was an opportunity for communism to rise. And the ANC, in this documentary, it does go into how some ANC leaders were working directly with the communists in Russia, with Moscow KGB. And it is unbelievable, the information that you get out of all the documentaries that I had watched. It is unbelievable. Now, you guys, I'm going to come out of this so we can go straight into the interview, okay? All right, you guys. So you saw those things. I showed you the daughter of a victim who goes into the murder of her father. That was hard to watch. I will link that documentary in the description box so you guys can watch it as well. And then you see from the documentary Tainted Heroes, where it goes into the history of how we got to where at that point it was like the early 2000s. You could tell from the camera footage is what that looks like that came out. And I think it was like 2008 when that documentary came out, Tainted Heroes. But you could see that there is a history of communism here. That there is a history of violence, not just towards the white Afrikaners, but towards South Africans who are Black as well. Anybody who decides to speak out against the communist regime, the corruption in the government, anyone who dare speak out against it suffers dearly. The violence that takes place in this country is unbelievable. And after having this conversation with the gentleman that I spoke with, his name is Philip. And before I show you guys the interview, I do want to tell you, we kept his last name off record out of fear that he would be attacked, that he would be targeted if we put out his full name. We did not get into detail about his exact location in South Africa because, again, he's concerned about his safety and that of his families. The idea that someone is in such concern for their lives and that of their loved ones because they speak truth is foreign to Americans. It's foreign to me. As a Black American, as a conservative, I get flack all the time. The worst I got was I was called an Uncle Tom, right? A traitor to my race. I never feared for my life because I speak out against the monolithic groupthink of Black people. I'm not worried because I don't see race. I'm not worried because I don't dislike men. I don't hate the patriarchy. I don't hate white America. I'm not concerned for my life because I don't share the views of the majority of Black Americans in this country. Whereas this gentleman, Philip, he is concerned so much so that he can't put out his entire name. I tell you guys, I am Arshel Branch. I am proud to say it, and I'm safe enough to say it because I was born and raised in the greatest country on the face of the earth. And so without further ado, you guys, let's go ahead and let's get into this interview where we go from the violence of the farm murders into the communism, as well as the history of the apartheid itself. And then you guys get to decide as to whether or not this genocide is taking place, if this man is credible yourself, because that was the accusation that was brought to me, right? That I'm not doing that I'm not looking into the information, that I'm not doing the research, that I'm just repeating everything that I'm hearing from President Donald J. Trump. As I said, if you have information, share it with me so I can come up here and say why this isn't happening. After everything that I've seen that people have sent me through links, through videos, through witness statements, or their own personal interactions with victims, I'm convinced this is a genocide that is taking place. Tens of thousands of people have been murdered because they are a different race. What would you call it? Now let's go ahead and let's get into the interview with this very brave South African, this white Afrikaner named Philip. Let's go ahead and let's get into it, shall we? So first, let's get started with why you decided to join me for this conversation. You know, what was it about the video that I posted that made you want to become a part of the conversation here?
It's not the video per se. It's the comment from the one alleged South African that reckons that there's no problem in the country. And he said to speak to real South Africans. And well, I'm a real South African. I live in this country. I see what's going around. And I want to set the record straight on some things that is being perceived by the international media and things that are peddled by, I want to say, leftists. Just as, you know, in terms of what the farm attacks are really like, you know, what the situation in South Africa is like, without all the political, dare I say, bullshit. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on your channel.
You are.
I really don't like strong words when you're out publishing things like this. But anyways, first of all, on the farm attacks itself, people say that, you know, it's only 40 a year, and since 1990, it's only been like 1,000 farmers, and it's just 1% of our murder statistics. And I mean, like, if you look at 29,000 murders a year in general, that's black and white, everybody included, that's a lot.
Yes.
I mean, that's more than actual war zones.
That's actually one of my questions, because on the documentaries that you showed me, they did speak to the fact that South Africa does have a high crime rate, but there's a few people that work for, I believe it's called the Blood Sisters, who acknowledge that there was a difference between, you know, robberies and those types of crimes versus the crimes happening towards the farmers. And
exactly
that the government doesn't actually have a category for that.
I mean, the thing that sets the farm murders apart is the absolute barbaric nature of it. It's not just that they go in, rob the people, and kill them. It is, I mean, there was this one case of this old man. I'm not sure if he's like 70 or 80 years old. He was tortured for 9 hours before they killed him.
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, and they do horrific things, like they would take your clothes iron, they tie people up with electrical cords found in the house, or even we've got a wire here that we call blue wire. It's a very, very tough wire. They would use that, any kind of wire, any type of cord, to tie people up with. They would heat clothes irons and burn people with it. They would drill into their limbs. They would hack them. They would hack their limbs off while they're still alive.
Yes, one of the Blood Sisters says she was finding parts of bodies, different areas.
Yes, I mean, it's really, really horrific, barbaric. And while these guys are at it, some of them even take the liberty of making food in your house for themselves, have a lunch while they're busy torturing your family, and sexually assaulting your wife in front of you. Sometimes the kids I mean, we're talking about young girls under 10 years old. They just don't care. So it is not that farm murders are just murders or it's just crime.
It's a different type of crime. Yeah.
It's a different type of crime. You can see the hatred. I mean, if you could see the crime photos, it's even worse than that one documentary that I shared the link with you.
Yes.
It is absolute. It's just, it changes you. Once you've seen something like that, it changes you. And it's really hard for us as white South Africans not to retaliate.
That's
and
interesting
do
because
something
you
about
see,
it.
in the States with Black Americans, specifically with the young Black Americans, I hear a lot from the left Black Americans that, we are oppressed, that we have something to fear. And after watching all the documentaries and the information that you sent me, I couldn't even help it. It's just, I'm proud to be American. I think we are incredibly blessed. What's your take? I'm not sure if you do hear some of the nonsense that Black Americans on the left are saying, that when you see what we're complaining about, how does that feel for you?
I feel it is sort of laughable, really, if you look at what Black Americans are complaining about. And I mean, recently I've seen this Black fatigue thing coming up. And I mean, if you want to talk about Black fatigue, you should come to South Africa and experience what that actually is. Now, as far as the situation for Americans are concerned, man, they've got nothing to complain about. I mean, I feel the Black Americans really got it good on that side from where I'm sitting, from what I'm seeing. And there are a lot of Black people in America that speak out and actually push back against this whole reparation. White people owe us something, and we are inferior, therefore we must get a leg up, and things must be handed to us, and affirmative action, all that.
And I can't speak for all Black conservatives, but I can say, just off the historical understanding, the common denomination of this, demanding reparations, it seems ultimately it's going to lead to violence. Anytime there is this type of argument, it just seems like that's where it's headed, which is why I don't think it's a good idea. And when I look at this situation in South Africa, this is where this is headed if we don't put a stop to it now.
But that's exactly the truth. And it's the same agenda that is being driven in America.
Wow.
And I think it's really the really poor people that do fall for it, because they don't see a way out of their situation, and what they are being fed, that's an easy way out, and they're grabbing onto it.
And it's somebody else's fault why their lives
Yes, it's somebody else's fault, and somebody else is going to give us the solution. We don't have to do a lot.
Now, you did hint earlier. I'm sorry, go ahead, continue. I'm sorry.
It is a similar situation in South Africa, where the poor people are really exploited by the government. And it's ANC government. It's Black government since 1994. We've had ANC for 30 odd years. I mean, since 1994, they came into power, and it's now it's the 31st year this year.
That's interesting. Earlier you suggested, I think this was very much leftist ideology that was seeming to plague what was going on here. I'm curious because in the documentary that you sent me, it was Tainted Heroes. They did speak to the communist regime of Russia, which I was really just taken back by just how involved communism played a role here. I think we always have an inkling. We'll just say things like, oh, that's just communist ideologies. And we take advantage of these phrases in America. I'm guilty of this myself, but I was really taken back by just how involved communism was in this. And I did see that the ANC did have some hand with the communist regime. And that's what you're saying has control over the government?
Yes, they're actually, they've got absolute communist agenda. Is absolutely communist. I mean, during the years of apartheid, I think another misconception that I need to set straight, and I'm going to try and run through this quickly in the interest of time, but if you want to elaborate on any of this, I mean, feel free to stop me and we can go into depth about it. Everybody claims that it's been 400 years of oppression, all right? Jan van Riebeeck came to the Cape in 1652. And the people lived there happily for many, many years. I mean, we're talking about, it's 150 years, almost 130 years. I think it's 100. No, it's not even that, because it was since 1652 to 1838 that the white settlers, if you want to call it that, landed in the Cape, and they made a way station there for the passing ships to replenish them, and they planted farms to have fresh produce for the sailors. And it was only in 1838 that my ancestors, called the Voortrekkers, or the Boers, if you please, moved away, because at that time the English came and annexed the Cape Colony, and they treated the people really, really bad. And the Boers just said, hey, listen, we don't want to stand for this. We don't identify with this. We're nobody's slaves. We're going to take our stuff and we're going to go inland and see what we can find there, and see where we can settle and away from you guys. So then the Great Trek started. That was in 1838, I think. And they negotiated with black tribes they came across, and at the same time, more or less, maybe a few decades before this happened, the black tribes also moved from Central Africa into Africa, and there were some that were probably here for a century or two. I don't know the exact time frame, but nobody's really permanently settled. And the people that they found here were all really primitive black people. They were still, the hunter-gatherer type of people that were running around in skins. I mean, they were doing fairly well. They had big herds of cattle. I mean, guys like Dingaan and Shaka were the kings of the Zulus. They had huge, shall I say, villages, with tens of thousands of people. It were huge settlements. And these guys tried to negotiate with them for a place to call home, to, pack off the ox wagons and start building a future. And we negotiated for 2 large tracts of land that we established republics on, that were internationally recognized as independent countries, basically. It was the Transvaal and the Orange Free State. And as soon as gold and diamonds were discovered, the English came from the Cape, annexed it, it was war. And again, the Boers were being persecuted by the English, and we lost those territories. They erased the borders. They made the whole of South Africa one place. And now remember, not to say that black people are inferior or anything, but at that time, the black population of South Africa had zero Western knowledge. They had no education. They had no linguistic skills, nothing. What they knew was to live off the land, and that's it. So to get them into a Western environment was rather difficult. And what the English did is they wanted to throw the Boers in with those black people to say they are the same class. I mean, we had Western education, farming skills, technology, and all these things that we had knowledge of. We had linguistic skills to communicate with the English, etc. I mean, it didn't go real well, but we learned English and we learned to get along and secure survival for the people. So, and now I think it was 1915, there was a Land Act. Now, at this time, the Boers were not in control. This was during the Boer Wars,
Mhm.
where the Union of South Africa was created. It was called the Union of South Africa, when the British just made everything into one basket. And in 1915, there was a law drafted called the Land Act of, I think it was 1915. And now a lot of people see this as racist against black people, but this was actually to protect black people from exploitation, so that white people couldn't go and buy their land for nothing, because they didn't have an understanding of the concept of money and the value of money.
Right.
They would trade cattle and stuff for trinkets. But whenever legitimate trade and stuff took place, that the Boers got cattle from these tribes. During the night, they would come, attack the farms, steal back the cattle.
Wow.
And your stuff's not being returned. It's just, hey, you paid your trade, but they come and steal the cattle. So the whole reason for apartheid had a backstory.
Yes.
It's not just for nothing. And so it was during this period that the homelands and stuff were being created, and where these tribes were found originally was where they were given land to develop themselves and to govern themselves according to their own culture and traditions, because they had king systems.
So essentially, it was about trying to find a way to integrate Western ideals into the culture that existed, where they can still get some protections, but they can live to their culture ideals.
Yes. I mean, the real idea behind it was to preserve all these different cultures, and also, as a secondary objective, to keep these tribes out of each other's hair, because they were murdering each other. There's a thing that you can research as well called Mfikane. Translated, it translates to the crushing, which was when the Zulus literally tried a genocide against the Xhosa people.
Wow.
And there were thousands of them killed. So, because of all these things that were happening between the tribes and everything, the homelands was, first of all, to preserve culture and traditions and stuff of the black tribes, so that they were not forced to integrate into Western traditions and norms like it happened in other places in the world at the same time. And of course, then to sort of have peace, because there's large pieces of land between these homelands. And these homelands were financed by the British and later the South African, the Afrikaner government, if you want to say that, when we became a republic in 1961. These homelands were financed by the government.
Wow.
So we did give them something. We tried to help them develop towards Western ideals and stuff,
Right.
to elevate them from this primitive way of living. And whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, it's not for me to say. We thought it was a good thing at the time. So,
well, there's
shoot it
something
for
that
it
I've
if we need.
noticed. It's not, it seems to me that, like with our news media, for example, we hear about these conflicts that take place globally. So there's obviously the Israelis versus Hamas, or the Palestinians. Then there's Ukraine versus Russia. We're always told that it's about the history between the two peoples. But is it possible that it's not so much about the history here, but that the government has something else sinister going on?
Absolutely. So, if we fast forward through history, the ANC was born somewhere in the same period as that first Land Act was created, in sort of 1915, 1920, 1925. They had their 100th birthday like a year or something ago, or a couple of years. I can't remember exactly when the ANC was established. Now, the ANC at the time was a totally different organization to what it is today, because communist, shall I say, interests were active globally in the whole world. In the 1950s, 1960s, everybody was shouting, the red danger, communism bad. And it was a real threat, because, I mean, if you look at communism, the history that communism has, it hasn't worked anywhere. It's just a disaster. It causes poverty and death. That's the bottom line of communism. So these communists, I think, for the purpose of getting to resources in the country, they supported these black tribes and started propagandizing them to revolt against the government of the time. Now, remember, we had our own republics for a short while in history before it was taken by the British. And in 1961, we got independence, on paper at least, from the British, and we became the Republic of South Africa. We were no longer known as the Union. And the Afrikaner was at the forefront of it, running things. Most of the people in government were Afrikaans-speaking people, because the majority of people in the country was Afrikaans. I mean, all the British picked up and left. There were a couple that stayed behind, but they were a small minority.
Wow.
So everything was Afrikaans that time. We were still funding these tribes and whatnot. But those years prior to becoming a republic, the communist ideals started to infiltrate the ANC and the black population in general. The government of the time saw the problems with that, and they tried to ban it and fight against it. They sent troops to the borders, up to Angola, Caprivi, a lot of these neighboring countries in Africa, to stop the guys there so that they could not come into the country and continue that propagandist campaign that they were running to radicalize people and, selling them this idea of communism. And that was largely, I mean, at the time, we had great victories. And now, interesting thing here is, during that war, it wasn't just white people that went to the border and fought. They were black people, because black people are notoriously good at tracking. And so they were used as translators and trackers, and even fighters. They fought alongside white people against this communist agenda. And even in skirmishes, in earlier history, where the Boers had skirmishes with the black tribes, there were other blacks that sided with the Boers. It's not just like a racist thing that we just came in and we just took everything. That's complete rubbish. That never happened. I mean, there are, especially during the apartheid era, that is, shall I say, earmarked from 1961 onwards, even though it started way before that, before we even became a republic, before the Afrikaner was in control of the country. There were instances of forced removals, and District 6 is a famous example where this happened. And I mean, everybody can go and see what it was about, why it happened. And yes, I don't agree that it is wrong. People should not be forcefully removed from any place. So yeah, we try to live in peace with the tribes that we found here. We tried to live in peace with the British, but since the onset, the Afrikaner never had peace. We were always hated by everybody, and I don't understand why, because we came as a friendly force into the country, just wanting to settle. We wanted to negotiate with the tribes we found along the way. They in turn wanted to war us because they weren't used to white people. They thought they were ghosts and magicians and whatever. And another thing that plays into this whole apartheid thing was the religion, because the Boers were Christian people. The blacks that we found
That's interesting.
knew nothing about Christianity. And to this very day, some of them still believe in the spirits of the forefathers and sangomas. These farm attackers, they go. Now, sangoma is a witch doctor, like a voodoo practitioner in your for something that you guys can understand. It's the same sort of thing. They practice the dark arts, if you will. It's witchcraft. So anyways, these farm attackers actually go to these witch doctors to get blessings. And, they got what they call a muti, which is sort of a talisman or something that they get from this witch doctor that would protect them from being detected or hurt in any way, and that their mission will be successful.
Is this type of practice something that is a part of the ANC? Like, do they subscribe to this kind of a religion? Would you say, with your knowledge?
As an organization, I don't want to say yes. I think in modern times it has diminished quite a lot. But
still not
Cyril Ramaphosa, which is our president, he still goes to sangomas for blessings and stuff. I mean, there are videos on YouTube that depict him with the sangomas where they're having this smoke over him and they're doing their chants and whatnots and talismans and throwing of the bones to read fortunes and stuff like that. So whether they believe it or not, it's not for me to say, but they do participate in it.
All right.
A lot of the younger people have turned their backs on this whole witchcraft ancestor worship thing, and young and old alike has moved a bit more towards Christianity, but it's not the Christianity that you might know as a Black American.
Wow.
It's a bit different, and we've got, I want to say, snake priests. We've had priests here that make their congregation drink gasoline, as a test of their faith.
Major
and
deviation from the
things
faith.
like that. And these priests abuse the women to say that they use their position as priests to actually sleep with the women of the church, making them believe that they've got some sort of messianic power, and if they sleep with them, they will be enlightened or whatever. That's the type of thing that they allow. So they, to this very day, they do not understand Christianity like you and I would. I feel that you have a much, much, much better understanding of Christianity, a much more deep-rooted faith than any of the guys we have here. So let's get back to this communist influence that took hold of the ANC somewhere between 1915 and 1950. They got exposed to the communist propaganda, and the government of the time didn't want to have any of it. I mean, even today, we do not want to do anything with communism because we've seen what it does.
Right.
Any sane person cannot possibly want to adopt communist ideals, but these people do.
That's interesting, because when I was watching one of the documentaries, it did reference the United States as it relates to, this is just going to be collateral damage. As I understand of the Cold War, of the U.S. involvement is that we were in the Middle East. You were pretty much all over the world for that conflict. But the idea was to stop communism from reaching these areas. I'm assuming it's because we wanted something out of those areas. Do you know if there's any, U.S. involvement in this getting worse for South Africa as relates to communism?
As I can't say that I personally know of direct evidence, but what I do know is during the 80s, specifically at the height of apartheid. Now, hear this: when sanctions were blanketed across the world against the Afrikaner government, during that period, we paid something like 85 cents for a dollar. So we paid less for a dollar than a dollar's value. And that was at the height of apartheid.
Wow.
We were doing development. I think we were the first country in the world to extract gasoline from coal. That's where our Sasol refinery comes from. It was developed during the apartheid era because nobody wanted to sell fuel to us. They didn't want to sell us anything. We couldn't play sports with them. We could do nothing. Denel was one of
independent.
Pardon?
You were forced to become independent because of all the sanctions.
We had to make things for ourselves because nobody would do business with us because we are these vile, in Biden's words during the 80s, a repugnant nation. Wow. That was Joe Biden's own words during the 80s. So he was definitely involved in this shift of power, and the setting up of sanctions and the eventual handing over of power. He had some role to play in it. I can't say who the other players were. I know some of our local guys who, at the time, I thought, hey, these are stand-up guys. Oh, they're not. They're so corrupt and in the pockets of international elites that really sold out their own people for a pot of lentil soup. Yes, the USA did have involvement, but I don't want to say that the USA as a country.
Right.
It was a party thing. It was a left versus right thing. It's not the entire country, but the one side did convince the other side to support with their own, leftist, politically correct speech, all those veiled things where they say a lot of words and it doesn't really mean anything tangible. It sounds like they're saying something good. That's good.
Conservatives, one of the reasons why I became a supporter of President Trump was because of this. It was becoming more obvious to me that there was a globalist agenda, that the idea of ripping sovereignty away from countries, trying to create division where there was none. Not to say that there wasn't complicated history there, but there was no race division, right? And then
the complicated history got exploited by these powers.
Yep.
In the pursuit of control of resources. That's what it's about. That's what this whole global system.
One of my viewers did bring, actually. They wanted to know, by asking you, actually, how has this, communism effect have, hurt the country? Because it seems to me that it's going to hurt everybody. We saw that in, what's the name of the country? Zimbabwe. They applied these communist ideals and then the whole country really suffered economically.
Collapsed.
Yeah.
And, Zimbabwe is so bad. I was actually shocked to see after these many years of Mugabe's rule and when they chased all the whites out of Zimbabwe and, seized their farms and stuff, what the people of Zimbabwe ate. And the poor guys were going around with huge skewers of rats that they sold to people as food. Rats. I'm not saying that a rat isn't a survival food, but I don't think it's fit for human consumption, man. That shouldn't be a staple. If you're really dying of hunger, sure, eat a rat. But that shouldn't be a staple.
Right.
And they almost devoured it as a delicacy because of the scarcity of food and stuff. I heard, I was watching another video one day of guys discussing this whole Zimbabwe situation. And at some point, their inflation rate was something like 17,000% or 1,700%, something awfully high. The inflation rate is just off the charts. And we used to joke over here that if you had Zimbabwe dollars and you wanted to go and buy a roll of toilet paper, you'd be better off just to wipe your ass with the money than, I mean, you'd go further using the money than there are actual sheets on a roll of toilet paper. That's how worthless the money became. I mean, they printed notes with trillions in value. And still, when people wanted to go buy milk and bread, they literally had to buy, not buy, but they had to cart the money with wheelbarrows to buy a loaf of bread and a bottle of milk. And these guys said, what is absolutely mind-blowing is the stories they heard, is that this guy would park his wheelbarrow at the line to the store because stocks are limited. So people are queuing, they're controlling, how much people can get, etc. So while this guy was waiting in the queue, he walked forward to see how the line was progressing. And when he came back, the money was dumped out of the wheelbarrow and they stole the wheelbarrow because it's worth more than the money inside the wheelbarrow. That's how far things deteriorated in Zimbabwe. And we can easily go in that direction.
Wow.
Excuse me. So now, when I was a kid growing up, if we had 1 hour of electricity interruption, that made news headlines because it was so atrocious. It was so negligent of our power utility to let us sit without power for 1 hour. It was wild, man. Today, we sit with what we call load shedding for anywhere between 4, sometimes 8, sometimes 12 hours a day. That it's rolling blackouts where they systematically switched off areas so you don't have any electricity for a set amount of time to avoid the grid from collapsing.
So they wanted to know if you were seeing any kind of global attention to the mineral rights. That's one of the accusations about President Trump bringing this whole thing to light, was that he has ulterior motives. He's only interested in bringing this information to light because he wants to negotiate a deal to have access to resources in South Africa. Would you say that's true, or is it two things can be true?
I will go with it's false. I'm going to go on that premise because Anglo American is the company that mines in South Africa. Anglo American. So they're already busy mining this country. Now, the government has made mining rights more difficult in recent years because, they got to get their cut of the pie. And just to explain to you the level of corruption in the government, not even the procurement of refuse bags for use in government buildings are exempt from corruption. I mean,
wow.
From the biggest thing to the procurement of garbage bags. Literally everything is infiltrated, corrupted, and it's not functioning as it should. We have taxi wars. Our public transport system was basically, we still have some sectors of it working somewhat, but it was taken over by minibus taxis. Like quantum type vehicles, 10, 15 seaters, something like that. Excuse me. And these guys literally shoot each other for routes that they want to serve, the more lucrative routes. And the same is going on in the trucking industry, where the owners of these companies get assassinated so that their rivals can take over that business. The same goes on in the property markets. where people get
concept is so
assassinated for
foreign
territory.
to Americans. It's when we see, like my older brother, he owns a trucking company, right? So he's had conflict with some of the bigger companies. He's had issues with brokers, but we deal with that with, negotiations, courtrooms, the idea that people are fighting over which route to take. I mean, taxi drivers, if you're from New York, it's get out of the effing way, right? It's so foreign.
Here you get shot. Here you'll just get shot.
Unbelievable.
Now listen to this. When the taxi associations and stuff go on strike,
Mm-hmm.
so they don't deliver public transport anymore because they're on strike. They block the roads everywhere for everybody that you cannot get to work. You've got nothing to do with their business and their grievances or anything. All you want to do is go to work, get your money for your family, and that's it. But they block the roads that you cannot get to work. They park their cars completely blocking the road. They put rocks in the road. They burn tires, etc., in the roads. And if you should pick up somebody that normally rides with them in a taxi, in your personal vehicle, to get them to work, and now we're talking about Black people mostly, because they're the guys that use the public transport.
Right.
If I should pick up a Black guy in my personal vehicle to make sure that he can get to work so that he can feed his family, these guys would stop you. They would forcibly remove that guy from your vehicle. And if you're lucky, you can drive away. Otherwise, they will torch your vehicle. This is not normal crime. This is syndicates. They're syndicates. The ANC is a criminal syndicate, and they're involved with this taxi thing and trucking, and like everything is interlinked. Everything is. You can trace it back to political connections, and the ANC promised their constituents free housing and free electricity and free this, free that. I don't know who's going to pay for it. We're sitting with a 40% unemployment in the country. So who's going to pay for this? To give now, if you look at our population, we're about 60 to 65 million people in total. The white people make about 7% of that. And the Afrikaner, as a subgroup of the white people, is maybe half of that 7%.
Wow.
And we're the hated ones. We're the ones who are told that we own 70% of the land and this and that. And that's another point that the media misleads people on, and people keep hammering on it. Yeah, white people own 70% of the land. It is not true at all. If you go and look at farmland, that is sort of the case, but it's not 70% of arable land, because I don't know if it was one of your videos or somebody else's where I saw they suggested that the government buy back farms, buy farms from the white people to hand out to the Black people. And a few decades ago, they tried that. It was like 10, 15, maybe 20 years ago, if it was that. They actually bought farms.
Yeah, I did do some research on that. I learned that South Africa, like the United States, has eminent domain, and for public interest, that the government could purchase property from those who own it. So that from anybody, it doesn't say just from the Afrikaners, but from anybody who might own land.
Anybody,
public interest. Yeah.
Yes.
But that was fascinating.
But they mainly bought from the Afrikaners, because the Afrikaners are really the farmers. The other, shall I say, white nationalities, there are some others that farm, but it's Afrikaner people who farm. And the Afrikaner is painted as the devil, and it stole everything. We didn't negotiate nothing with nobody. We just forcibly removed everybody from their land, and that has now got to go back to the previously disadvantaged.
Which enables violence.
Back then they had, and it's still supposed to be the thing today, where they had the willing buyer, willing seller. Everybody's got to be willing to get into the selling of business. And farmers did sell their farms. And I'm talking about export farms.
Well, I do want to ask you a few more questions before we wrap this up. I remember in our email correspondence, you were saying why you would not come to the United States. And I was curious because my brain just started like, I wonder why. Like, is it something about America? Like, I just needed to know. So why
No,
not?
it's absolutely, it's not about America.
Mhm.
I really considered it at some point, I gave it some thought,
Mhm.
but I feel that I need to stay here. This is where the Lord placed me, and live or die, this is where I'm going to stay. This is where my calling is. This is where my ancestors got buried. They fought with their blood, their sweat, and their tears to make a living for us as a cultural nation in the southern tip of Africa. And I feel if I now go to the United States, I would be pissing on all their graves, all their sacrifice. And the same for the soldiers, both black and white soldiers that went into Africa to try and stop the communism from screwing up this country. If I leave, if the white people leave, there's nothing that's going to stop this from becoming a third world country. And I can tell you now, the murder rate between local black tribes will go through the roof.
Wow.
Up to this very day, the Zulu and the Xhosa people, they don't see eye to eye. They're not friends. Even I think it was one of the Zulu tribes that split up, and the one group got chased into what is known as Zimbabwe today. So it's just more proof that there's so much infighting going on, and everybody wants everybody's stuff, and the one cannot see the sun rise over the other one's head. But I feel a patriotism to this land. I feel that if I move to South Africa, and I'm not diminishing anybody who decides to go to America, because really our lives are at risk in this country. I do not blame anybody for leaving. I just feel that, for me, I would be responsible for the death of a language, the death of a culture, because if we move to any country, and I can see this in my niece living in Australia, the Afrikaans gets less and less, and in 1 to 2 generations that dies down. They won't speak the language anymore. They would have adopted, assimilated to the country where they go to. And if I go to America, I have to assimilate to American culture. And I have no problem with the American culture, absolutely, because it's largely a Christian nation. I think we got a lot of cultural things in common, in fact. But I wouldn't want to sacrifice my roots, my heritage, my culture, my language, and just let it die because I want to survive. If they want to kill me, hey, we'll all have to die once. I made peace with death. If they should invade my house tonight and kill me, we all have to die once. And it would actually be sort of a relief to be rid of all this evil that's going on in the world. So I've made my peace, and I do believe that God will not leave us to just die. I do believe that God will take care of us, and that's why I'm staying. I would love to go to America and experience America, and maybe even work in America. But I wouldn't want to go there as a refugee, and I wouldn't want to go there permanently, in the sense that I would be complicit in sacrificing my language and my culture. It's
And that's
something
incredibly
that's in my
honorable.
heart.
That is
So,
incredibly honorable, Philip. Very. That's my
and a
generation.
lot of people,
I
lot of,
really appreciate that.
a lot of the Afrikaner people feel like that. We don't want to run away. We do have some, shall I say, safety measures that we work on. There are farm groups, there are urban groups. Should Julius Malema and his crowd go over into action? And this is another thing that I wanted to say about this genocide term, because people say that there is no genocide in South Africa, and I'm saying just because it's happening really, really slow doesn't mean it's not a genocide, because a genocide is the obliteration of a cultural group. How fast that happens is irrelevant. They're
Right.
erasing our language, which is one of the 11 official languages of South Africa. I think it's the third most spoken language in the country.
Wow.
Is Afrikaans, but they want to remove it from education. They want to remove it from all public service spheres and everything. Afrikaans mustn't have a place. We can't get tuition. The universities that were built by the Afrikaner people, they can't even have tuition at those universities in their home language,
That's
even
insane.
though that's how it was established originally.
How does the
And-
government approach Christianity for those of them, for the Afrikaners who do have that faith?
I would say that at least they leave us alone. Some of these guys would claim that they are Christian, and this is another thing as an Afrikaner, which is really difficult for me to stomach, and I think for a lot of my fellow countrymen, it's hard to stomach. If you go and look, if you're a Christian, if you call yourself a Christian, you cannot possibly support what is happening in this government. The very first commandment says, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not worship me next to another God. But when the open parliament and things like that, they have this, I don't even know what to call it. It's literally an orgy of religions where they ended off in the name of Krishna and Allah and Buddha and God Trinity, and they mention all these gods. It is totally, I cannot accept this. And after the 1994 elections, when we gave everything over, they started what they call the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and every single white person that was any part of any piece of the Afrikaner government was dragged before what they called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And so there, everybody had to state their cases, why they did what they did, and they had to apologize and apply for amnesty so that there could be peace. And everybody participated in that. Up to this day, not a single black person that witnessed those atrocities perpetrated by the ANC during apartheid,
Speaks out.
where
against
black people horribly, horrifically killed other black people for daring to support a different party than the ANC. Up to this very day, not a single black person is asking a question or an apology or anything from the ANC.
See, now something like that I'm familiar with Black America. It's called the no snitching, right? You don't be a snitch. You see gang violence. If something horrific happened, you didn't see it. I'm not a witness. Even though you know who was involved, you know which gangs, you know who did what, you just won't say anything out of fear that they'll show up at your doorstep ready to do all these terrible things.
That fear campaign that they ran back then, people still remember it. And I say, it's sort of a bit like Stockholm Syndrome. They're suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. They're totally, I want to say, in love with their captors. And only now, the black people are really starting to wake up about what the ANC is and what they're doing to this country. Why does a 10% party shouting expropriation without compensation, why does that legislation get put into law by a 10% party? Because it's just them shouting for it.
Yep.
How does it happen? You want to tell me that it's not a part of the ANC? Sorry, I don't buy that. But anyways, back to this, how the BE works. So we have to reflect the demographic of South Africa in all positions, management, upper management, middle management, floor level, everything. It must reflect the demographic of South Africa. So white people can only occupy 7% of any job market. Now what happens is there are white people who are qualified for jobs that are being frozen. The jobs, the positions are available, but the positions are frozen because they cannot find suitable black candidates for it. And a white person is not allowed to apply for it because then you're going to screw up the demographic reflection.
So now with a policy like that, does the business suffer as well, like badly?
Exactly. So I mean, businesses get in trouble. There are big companies that are basically leaving South Africa. I feel we're on the verge to lose a lot of automotive guys. We have this big steel plant in the Vaal Triangle, which is basically going out of it. It's now owned by ArcelorMittal. It was owned. It used to be known as Iscor. ArcelorMittal bought it out, and ArcelorMittal itself is now starting to shut down operations in South Africa, costing thousands of jobs. This is going to cause us to have to import certain types of steel because they're not making it anymore.
To become more dependent on the global economy than to be independent.
We're definitely going to become a net importer. Nothing will be made here. Nothing. Because the industries are dying one after the other. Companies are fleeing. And Cyril Ramaphosa is writing to you, say, oh, we need investment and well, we need to grow the economy. But they're barring us from taking part in this, to create solutions. And by the way, I've been unemployed for a considerable amount of time. My wife is the breadwinner in my household. I don't feel good about it. I just have to accept it. As a man, it's really, really hard to bear.
It's hard for you to find work that actually can just accept the fact that you're a white Afrikaner.
I stopped sending out my CV after about 1,000 where I just didn't get any reply. No reply. No invitation to an interview to even go and try and sell myself. It's just I don't get replies. It's as if my CV is going straight to the trash. And I can bet you that there are thousands of other white South Africans that suffer the same fate. Now, my specific circumstance, I can't apply for just any job because I've got a medical condition which prevents me from doing heavy, manual labor. I used to be a boilermaker.
Oh, wow.
And I cannot apply that trade anymore because I stuffed up my back. Because people exploit you because of the high unemployment. They exploit you, make you do things that you shouldn't be doing with your body. And mine got broken. They just said, "Hey, stuff you." They wanted to fire me. I fought it for a while at least, and then eventually I just gave up and say, "Hey, listen, you guys stuffed me. I can't do anything about it. I've got no power. I've got no money to get lawyers against you. I just have to accept my fate." So the number of jobs I can actually apply for is very, very limited.
Wow.
But you can check through the bank. That's how it goes. We're being excluded. And if I am to start my own business, I have to give away 30% to a black person, a random black person. Give away, not sell. Not he invests 30% with me. I have to set up everything and give him 30%.
Oh, my goodness. Well, we did discuss a lot of what seems to be corruption and government enabling the behavior. And so, what do you want my viewers to take away from this? Really, all this that we have. We've been speaking for about an hour and a half now. Out of everything that we've spoken about, from the violence and the forced policies. I mean, that 30% equity that you just give away. I mean, that's outrageous to me. It doesn't. Like, we hear it here in the States, where I hear DEI, Black Americans don't get enough equity. We have to just start making policies where Black Americans get the leg up. We've had white farmers be denied for certain loans during the Biden administration. He did implement DEI policies where Blacks, Black women, anybody that wasn't white or Asian wouldn't get the jobs, wouldn't go to get to the student loans to go to college, or were just denied altogether. If they were able to get funds, then it wasn't as much as others. So we're already seeing that here, and it's terrifying.
Personally, what I feel is that this whole idea of DEI and Black economic empowerment is actually derogatory, because it says that you as a Black person cannot on your own
Get
anywhere. We have to give you a DEI position or a Black economic empowerment thing. We have to give you a
leg up.
A leg up, because you cannot do it on your own.
So
I think it's a slap in the face. It's a slap in the face.
It is. As a conservative, I completely agree with that. All right, you guys. So unfortunately, as I was doing the editing, I found that the end of the interview had been damaged. I don't know how. Some things happen with the computer, and I'm not a computer genius, so I don't know how to fix that. But I do think you got the gist of what Philip had to say. There was a lot of conversation there. It was over an hour. We spoke for almost 2 hours, actually, and I'm so sorry that we couldn't get the whole thing up here. He has decided to join me live. So if you guys are interested in having a live conversation where you can get your questions out to him directly, we can set something up. You guys let me know if you would like to see a live conversation. I was very proud to have this conversation. Again, it does not change my views on immigration, but I thought it was incredibly brave of him and honorable that he doesn't want to leave his home. He doesn't want to leave South Africa. He wants to honor his ancestors, honor those who've lost their lives, so that way he could be free. He wants to get the truth out, because at the bare minimum, if something does happen, there will be a witness to the violence. There will be a witness to the destruction of an entire race of people. And who are we to say, as Black Americans, that we have something to be afraid of when this is the everyday lives of white Afrikaners and South Africans who are also Black, who dare stand up against the tyranny of a corrupted communist government who would choose globalism over the independence of their own nation. And so I was very proud to do this interview, very happy to have spoken with Philip, and I hope you guys enjoyed the interview. You guys get in the comment sections and let me know if you would like to see a live interview with this gentleman, so that way you guys could have your questions brought to him directly, so we can have that conversation live with Philip. Let me know what you thought about the interview in its entirety. Did you learn anything? Are you convinced the way I've been convinced? This is a genocide. I do believe that that's what this is. Like so many people across the globe, especially the Black Americans here, you have a history that is being exploited in the best interest of a corrupted government, of globalist elites. This is why the America First policies matter. This is why putting aside the petty differences of race and gender matter. If we are so busy focused on our history, as opposed to focusing on protecting individual liberties and standing by each other as Americans, then we too could be easily manipulated into creating unbelievable violence towards a specific group of people who had absolutely nothing to do with the violence of our ancestors yesteryear. So you guys get in the comment sections. I hope you enjoyed this. I learned a lot. And, you know, if you want me to have that live conversation with Philip, you guys get in the comment sections and let me know. I hope you really enjoyed this and learned a lot. I'm convinced it is a genocide, and the South African government is only enabling the bad behavior. Why? I believe it's because they want to prioritize globalist communism. That's what I think. I could be wrong, but that's what it looks like. So if you guys are in the comment sections, let me know if you agree with that. You all have a great night. God bless. Pray for the victims. Pray for the victims of the white Afrikaners, and pray for the South African people in general, because I do think that they are being manipulated. And I do think that innocent Blacks are also being killed, just like the innocent white Afrikaners. The violence needs to stop. I don't think that we should get involved as Americans, of course. However, we can pray for them. I think we should do that. You'll have a great night. God bless and